friends, I'm so excited to be here with my best friend, Deborah Atianne. She's an intuitive coach. She's returning to Rebranding God podcast because she has a great story to share. We're going to talk today about fear, stress. Can fear make us sick? And this is a big subject, and I'm super excited to have a great conversation with you, Deborah.
I'm very excited as well.
Awesome.
So right up my alley.
So I think we need to jump in straight into your personal story, like how you had cancer and how you healed your cancer, all the holistic approaches that you had. And we're not here to describe that illnesses, diseases are only created by or repress or suppress emotions. There's always the aspect that we need to consider about epigenetics or diet or lifestyle. And we know because of a lot of research, a lot of proof that our repressed emotions, unexpressed emotions become chronic stress, makes our nervous system very dysregulated. So we're going to speak about that, how we can use our stress, even use our fear to actually grow and not let these emotions that can teach us so much to make us sick. So let's start with your experience.
Well, I've had a few big experiences. You know, you spoke to cancer first, which is, interestingly, we talked the other day, it's such a big topic, right, in the world. And currently I know quite a few people that are actually experiencing a cancer. I'm going to call it a cancer diagnosis, because
Great.
I think it's really important to own the experience in some way, but not make it like who I am, right? Mm-hmm. So like for me, I don't even use the words, and other people need to, but this idea of like, I'm not a cancer survivor. It feels like that'll get me really sticky. That's just for me. It's an experience that I had. In a way, it's in a box where I went in and through it like a storm, and came out the other side. Now, for me, the cancer experience, even though it was very intense, not as intense as other people, that actually wasn't as, I'm going to say, 3D horrendous for me as having an immune issue, a chronic immune situation that was just completely asking me to wake up to ways of being, things that were happening in my life, things that I had, you mentioned, suppressed, that I didn't even know were grinding in the back of my life. So I had a cancer experience, and this is before between my two children, if you will, and that was big. And I'm going to set that aside a wee bit, because what I really experienced in awakening in this work and in this disease process was this invitation that I was ignoring things in my body. I was ignoring things in my life. I definitely had some repressed energy, emotions, anger, you name it. Anything that you can name, I probably will say, yeah, I have that. And so I was really unwell, and it was messing up my career at the time. I felt like I couldn't be a good mom. I felt like I couldn't be, a good wife. I think the beauty of illness for me is that it invites you to go in. Mm-hmm. It's saying, hey, something's up here. And I want to state for the record, because I tell my clients this all the time, having a disease process is not a punishment. And I know a lot of people feel like, I'm such a good person, I'm spiritual, I'm going to church, I'm a good fill in the blank, right? And often they'll feel like they're being punished from some outside source. And I can tell you from my own experience, from all the people I work with, it is not a punishment at all. And to me, it's an invitation. So my invitation at that time, I was very unwell. I had so many things going on that I ended up quitting my job at the time and just focusing solely on how do I get well. And I ended up having what we would call a mystical experience, which you and we love those, right? We love them. And obviously not intentionally. I wasn't trying to do anything to have that experience.
Can you describe the mystical experience? Because
yes, I can. So
this audience loves that.
Great. Well, you're gonna hear it. So we had just taken my son to his first away time at school, where they were going to go on some camping trip or something. And we lived in California at the time. It was a very cold, gray morning. And at that time, one of the things I was experiencing was I could not get my temperature of my body to regulate. So I was very cold all the time, which is very common in immune issues where your body's seemingly attacking itself. And so I had come home, I climbed back into bed. My husband at the time put tons of blankets on me, heating, all that kind of stuff, and I just couldn't get warm. And we also lived where they had built the homes kind of near swamp or waterways, which the homes tend to be cool anyways. And I remember laying in bed and by myself, and I literally just said in my mind, right, this house is so cold. And right after I said that, the entire energy of the space in my room, it's hard to describe, but thick is the best word. Like, it got still, and there was some sort of texture to it that just made me stop in my tracks. And I literally heard a voice. Usually when I'm hearing for my clients or for myself, it's inside my head, and wildly it sounded like someone was speaking outside of my head. So it was this, what I consider a bigger voice. So the bigger voice basically said, right after I said, this house is so cold, the words I heard specifically were, you need to leave this house. And at that time, I was like, it seemed so normal, because what was in the thickness of that room was, it felt like there was a nest of love, is the best way I can describe it. And love that maybe we get more from animals than often humans. And so I hear, you need to leave this house. And wildly, just as if this was just a common thing for me, of course, I mean, it's more now, but I said,
I'm gonna move this little.
oh yeah.
I
said, why? And the voice said, because there's a better life waiting for you.
Wow. So not necessarily because there's something wrong with the house, like mold or asbestos. No, it was just energetically, it was a message for you to make a change in your life. Got it.
And then I laugh. My joke is like, here's this beautiful, loving voice speaking to me. And my responses or questions were so simple. And maybe that's a key too, about just simple. And things don't have to be so exaggerated or big, or maybe we don't have to get to points where things feel so big and exaggerated. Anyway, so I said, when? And the voice said, in less than 2 years. And I was like, okay. And then it just held for a little bit, and then it just felt like it just simmered down. And I laid there going like, what the heck happened? I don't even know that I even said that at the time, but what struck me that at that moment was the better life waiting for you. And I thought to myself, well, if a better life is waiting for me, then it's gotta be that I don't feel this way, because this certainly is not a better life. And at that time, just so the audience knows, some of my symptoms, I was actually a dental hygienist at the time. My gums were bleeding, and it wasn't from lack of care. I had basically dry eyes, dry mouth, pain in my legs, pain in my body, having trouble walking. I could hardly hold my instruments like I used to as a dental hygienist, so that wasn't going to be safe for my clients. I was exhausted again, the temperature change, and literally the energy just felt like I was dying, because I was not fully alive. It just felt like I was slipping away slowly. So what caught me in that moment was a better life's waiting for me. And I just was really just feeling that. And then this inner voice came in, which said, basically, if my body can get into this mess, then my body could get out of it.
Yeah.
And something about that was like cold water on my face.
Yes.
And so after that, what I did was I started actually listening and observing, and anything that came into my sphere that caught my attention that could be part of healing, I basically did it. I think there's only one thing during that time that I didn't do, But I ended up excavating a lot of stuff, and as simple and as profound as realizing I didn't get to go to my grandfather's funeral. We were being protected. So when I started working with, actually one thing I did was working with it doesn't matter. We'll get back to that. I worked with a specific type of medicine that I can't say right now. And during that time, it was all about excavating and looking at mind, body, soul information. And so during that time, I understood that I had suppressed this sadness, this deep sadness and this anger in being able to be in some sort of ceremony and closure for me with my grandfather. That was just one thing. But ultimately, it was betrayal. I was betraying myself at the time. I was saying yes when I meant no, no when I meant yes. I really cared about appearances and making sure things were perfect, because why? I didn't feel very perfect inside, right? Lots of anger, lots of frustration as a mom, as a wife, and basically my life was pretty out of alignment. It looked good from the outside, which is another thing that we get on the awakening path. There's certain things that society says that we're supposed to do. You're going to be successful if you have X, Y, and Z, right? I had gone to college and got married and had the children and had the career going, and actually multiple careers at the time, and I felt very empty and deeply lonely, and it was an invitation to wake up. So when you speak about fear, my fear that what people were thinking of me, fear that maybe at that time I had my second child, but fear that maybe this relationship isn't really where I need to stay in, how am I going to do that? I have children, those are just a few things. Yeah.
So ultimately, any unexpressed, repressed and suppressed emotions in the long term, and if we put all of them under the emotion of fear, they can ultimately make us sick.
Yeah.
Because they create chronic stress in the body, and there's a whole bunch of science in this, in the physiology of stress and what happens in the nervous system, what happens in the brain, what happens with our immune system when we are exposed constantly to the hormones of stress. So this is actually chemistry, if somebody wants to understand more how chronic stress can make us sick. And I'm intrigued about the anger part, because I've done quite a bit of research on autoimmune diseases and cancer, and mystics, teachers, even MDs like Dr. Gabor Mate, and many other experts that have written books about this, that we have certain personality traits that are more prone to illnesses like autoimmune disease and even cancer. So what people say sometimes about cancer is a lot of suppressed anger. And in the work that you and I do together, we know well that anger is a secondary emotion. That anger is always covering up, like you said, deep sadness, or a lot of times deep grief. And then we experience a lot of anxiety, because to me anxiety is just kind of the lid on the pot, like trying to hold everything down, not letting those emotions come out, especially let our fear being exposed, because I think in our society we use the word stress to mask fear. Most people are going to say I'm stressed out. Most people are not going to say I'm scared right now. I think the conversation is definitely changing now. That we say more, I'm scared of not having enough money, I'm scared of being lonely for the rest of my life, I'm scared of getting sick, right? So at least people are labeling better now, but labeling doesn't mean they're healing. So I'm intrigued about this aspect of anger. Let's explore anger a little bit, because it's such an emotion that, speaking of fear, people are afraid of their own anger.
Oh yeah.
So in your experience, through your experience of autoimmune disease and even cancer, what was the anger aspect, if we could describe it more?
Like my own personal anger?
Because I'm sure your personal anger is going to relate to a lot of us.
Well, and I'll start with this that I think also might resonate for people who are like, I don't feel angry, or right.
Oh, that used to be me. I don't have anger.
And I love it. I hope other people can laugh with us because it's hysterical. So maybe two things that I could share and then talk about like the specific topics, right? So I remember being referred. I had a beautiful chiropractor at the time. This is a woman who's like super far out there, super woo, spoke 7 languages, super intuitive. And she had recommended this therapist for me. And I'd been already going to therapists since I was like 14, just, the mom, like, you need, like, if you go, everything will be fine, but that was probably part of my anger. Like, why aren't the parents going?
Yes.
Why is it the child?
Well, we're going to blame the child.
Yeah, the child just would behave, right? I mean, I know it came from a good heart, of course. So I love you, Mom. So I ended up going my very first appointment with her, and I knew pretty quick she's a very intuitive woman, but she didn't couch herself like I do, like intuitive therapist, coach, or whatever. And so I go in the very first appointment, 3 big questions she asked me, Alex, and we can laugh because it's funny now, right? When I tell you my answers, in the moment, they were completely honest.
Yeah.
They truly were. She asked me, do you feel like you're an angry person? No, not at all. I'm sure my voice went up, which is a clue when I'm working with people. I'm like, no, not an angry person. No, not at all. Right, I'm raging at home, probably at my kids at the time. She said, have you ever been abused or assaulted? No. Lie number 2. But honestly, in that moment, I'm in such, like, I've packaged things away that I'm actually saying the most honest answer. So, are you angry? Nah. Have you been assaulted? Nah. And the third thing she asked me, oh yeah, do you feel like you love yourself? Okay, I'm just smiling right now because it's been decades since this, and I get it so much more, right? We think we love ourselves. And I'm like, of course, like, what are you talking about? I drive home, I pull into my driveway, and we had talked earlier about like shame and guilt. My body,
something got opened.
My body was on fire. The entire body. I haven't even turned the car off, and my body is hot. And I'm like, and instantly, it's almost like I woke up, and it was like, oh my God, you just lied to her. I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't even think it at the time. But I'm like, holy crap, I'm going to need to go back for my second appointment and go,
yeah.
Clearly I don't love myself to the degree that I could. Yes, I've been abused, assaulted, and yes, I'm pretty angry.
Yeah.
Why do you think I'm here, right? So I ended up doing that. Of course, she was lovely and beautiful and helped me with a lot of things, but I had put them in boxes like we all do and put them away for, I'm going to say safekeeping, so that we can survive, so that we can move through whatever we're needing to move through. And when we're ready, whether we think we're ready or not, maybe it's a soul readiness, these things are going to start to spill out.
Yeah.
They just are.
Yeah. So what I love is like you use your illness, as you said, your diagnosis as an invitation to explore these emotions.
Oh yeah.
Now, we know well, we need to say this, and I say this with a lot of compassion. I think what you call your mystical experience is almost like a voice that most people hear when they get a diagnosis like that. They have their whisper, maybe they had their whisper for a while, saying, hey, you need to change your life. Hey, you need to leave this relationship. Hey, you need to quit this job. It's like they know. Yes. And yet, a lot of people will not accept the invitation at the time to go explore the emotional aspects of illness. And again, it's more complex because the illness is going to also have a physical element. We can even say there's a spiritual, part of soul agreements that maybe we have time to talk about later in this podcast. But if we stick with the emotional aspect right now, because it's huge, we know 95%, this is what the science tells us, 95% of illnesses are caused or exacerbated by stress, aka emotional psychological stress in the form of worry, anxiety, repressed anger that will cause anxiety. So for the listeners out there, that my hope is that people just take actions, investigate this work, the repressed emotions, when they start hearing the whispers, and not wait for the body to scream.
Right.
Because you said something very important. I think the combination of people saying yes when they want to say no, combined with a lot of repressed and suppressed emotions, unresolved emotions from the past, the combination of those two things can create tremendous crisis in the body. And if we don't listen, the body has no choice but to express some kind of symptoms initially, and eventually, if ignore an illness, but as you said, not as a punishment, but almost as it's a cry for help.
To me, it's our body's wisdom is saying, hey, something's off course, right?
Yeah.
And what's so important, I think, for us to look at too, and also to be okay with, because some people are like, oh, how did I get here? Why didn't I listen? It's like, in a way, be kind to yourself and don't worry about that, because for me, I had all these symptoms way before, way before. But at the time, I'm raising stepkids, I'm raising, my own kids, I'm working, in my dental job, I'm working in the family pharmacy business, I'm a mom, I'm tired, right? I'm tired, and I just chalked it up to, this is part of life right now. I'm busy, I'm tired, this is exhausting. I just didn't put it all together, and my body perfectly did something for me that made me take action. And so I'm in the dental field, right? I know a lot of stuff about medical stuff, dental stuff. We're taking health histories. We understand a lot of different disease processes and how they affect the mouth. And when I was eating, my salivary glands would get really painful. And I was like, that's weird. I mean, every once in a while, some people will have that. I bite a pickle or something like that, and it'll give you a zing. Well, this was like, holy cow. Like, I thought, this is really painful, huh? And then my gums started bleeding. So in other words, I was ignoring what was happening to me, if you will, through me, and putting it off as other things. And my body was so wise, in cahoots with, to me, all that is. It's like, well, I guess we're going to need to have some bleeding gums, because I know what kind of care I did with my mouth, and that's just not an option, I think, if you're a hygienist and work.
Right.
And so that made me realize that this disease process was upon me, and that's what made me take action and start looking and get the blood tests and all that kind of stuff. And so sometimes we're not going to listen.
Yeah.
I listen better now about my body. And I do things and push myself more so now in saying yes when I mean yes and no when I mean no, and all the things that I didn't do, because if I begin to have any kind of symptomology in my body, I'm like, what do we need? What's happening? What's going on?
Yeah.
I'll give myself space to rest. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
anger.
So going back, anger, the fear of anger, but I think this can help us to segue back to the topic of fear. Fear can make us sick, yes, we know it can, but fear can also liberate us.
Yeah.
Because the invitation to do this inner work is to face with compassion, with safety, with a lot of kindness, to face those aspects of us, like the suppressed anger, the suppressed sadness, that always goes back to the past. And a lot of people fear this work itself because they're so afraid that, people use these expressions, I don't want to open the Pandora box, past, we should live in the past. And yet, I agree, the past is the past, we only have the present moment, and the body holds all the memories of the past. So if the body is going to express, even react from the memories of the past, so just because of that, we have to use what's happening in our present moment, how the body's communicating with us, to heal something from the past.
Absolutely. Well, if those unresolved things are in, so let's link that in present moment. If someone has a diagnosis and a disease process in their body, then they have those emotional pain pockets, let's say, that are in there, so that stored memory is in the now with them.
Exactly.
Right? So they, that excavating is the invitation for sure to go in. And I do understand people don't want to do that. And one thing that's coming to me, and as a download right now, is like, some people will say, but I had a great childhood, my parents were great. I always go, okay, you might have, but that doesn't mean that you escaped some level of trauma in your life. And often people will categorize, well, I didn't have that, I wasn't assaulted, or my parents didn't sexually abuse me, or whatever their thing is, and they minimize it.
Yeah.
But all you can look at is your own life, and just evaluate your trauma from your own place, and not comparing it to someone else, right? I think a lot of women tend to be, if you will, I want to say, that's not a great word, tend to have a lot of disease processes that go unresolved because they are doing too much, right? They're caretakers. I kind of joke around about the feminist movement, and don't persecute me here. Although even in our lifetime, in my mother's lifetime, my grandmother who's still on the planet right now, what's changed for women, there's also an extra burden of still having, if you choose to have children and be married, to be still responsible so much. And I know there's exceptions here, but they're working outside the home. They're still responsible for so much that has to do with family life. And I think it's more intense than ever for a lot of women. And they're trying to be perfect moms, and
they want to do it all.
And we've been sold that we can do it all. And it's like, well, maybe if you have a lot of resources and you're in a relationship where you're feeling held and your needs are met and that person's needs are met, and you're really, a very conscious, evolved family, but most are not.
Well, I think the movement, the shadow of the movement, created this concept that we have to be over independent and not need help. And I see, if we talk about traits that are underneath diseases, this trait of, I don't need anybody to help me, because the shadow of the movement created that. I don't need anybody to help. And the truth is, we need a village. It takes a village to raise children, and we totally lost the concept of the village, where, like you said, women were left to do it all, to go to work, to be a good wife, to be a good mother, to be a good executive CEO or a good teacher, whatever profession she chooses, and we know the consequences of that. And that's a whole
well, and I think that goes with that
whole conversation, the
perfectionism, which I can tie back to the fear, right? It's so linked. I'm not so perfect. I'm not doing it right. I'm not doing it good enough, or whatever that story is internally. And without exception, any person I've worked with in the capacity of getting well, there's always an underlying thing or things that are catching the attention, for sure.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think Dr. Gabor mentioned in his book, in his book, And the Body Says No, he has a chapter that he talks about the personalities of cancer. And one of them is the perfectionist. So I think
Gabor knows what he's talking about.
He does know. And I think that's a great place to explore, because so many of us, I would love to say I'm not a perfectionist at all, and yet there is an area in my life, even in my own healing, I was being a perfectionist. I need to heal perfect, or my connection with spirit needs to be perfect, right? And I see a lot of clients, how much they're struggling because they're living under the archetype of, I need to be perfect. So let's talk. I think this is worth
go
putting some time in describing what is the fear that is, because perfectionism is a compensation for a sense, we can say, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, so there's a compensation. So what is the fear that is underneath this, pursuit of perfectionism?
Straight away, unworthiness.
Unworthiness.
I feel like it's that essence of not understanding the grace of who we actually are, what we actually are, and that's all layered under the masks of all the identities that we've taken on and that we've in a way ingested from other people, who we are. You know, we've taken on what people have said about maybe our bodies or our way of behavior, and if we have any inklings of not feeling worthy, which actually I have yet to meet anyone who doesn't have some level of that they've been working on or are still working on, or that catches their attention, including myself. So I feel like what's coming through too is this idea of feeling so separate. And for you and I know a foundation for us, and a foundation for me that's been a long time, is any area in your life, if you're wanting improvement, it is an invitation to your own conscious awakening. Period. End of story. Like, we could stop right there. That's it.
That's it, right?
Really, because the essence is along the journey of awakening, I believe we're trying to go home to ourselves and who we are.
Yeah.
And so in that misunderstanding of our actual perfectness, we're trying to be perfect. Yeah. And so there's a disconnect there. And I'll give you one example that was really helpful for me. It was not too long ago, when COVID started, I remember sitting in a ceremony just on my own in a day, just being with what was coming up. And I remember having this thought, like, if I've made any kind of, signed contract soulfully that I'm going to leave at this time, I don't want to. I want to renege any of that contract. I don't know why I need to do that. Probably some fear. But I was like, I just want to be clear. Whatever is happening right now, I want to be here for it. And I want to move in and through however this takes me, right? So that was one. And I said, I want to be a blessing. No, so tie this in with this perfectionism and all this. I said, I want to be a blessing. And what I heard was, notice how you're wanting to be a blessing, and yet you actually are. And that's not saying I'm special. It's saying, and I got it really clear, every single person is a blessing, period. End of story. Without doing anything different, they just are, right? And in that moment, I kept getting this schooling, if you will. It was like, try on what it feels like. Feel in your body what it feels like wanting to be a blessing. So I tried that on, and it was like, now feel like what it feels like to actually feel that you are. And it was such a fine tuning and such a great lesson for me to go, without doing anything else, without becoming something, without making more money, without anything, just an already are. Right? So I feel like that is some of what we're up against when we're working with a diagnosis. Yeah.
This, for some reason, it's connect me with this deep teaching of the spiritual text, A Course in Miracles. Yeah. That says we can heal the body because what makes the body sick is the mind. So we need to heal. We heal the mind.
Absolutely.
Not the body. Yeah. And I want to point something about fear here, which is, the fear we're really speaking of here is the fear that we are imagining, is the fear that we're thinking. It's not actually the fear that somebody might break into our house right now, or the house might catch on fire. Of course, we know how to deal with that fear because it's already installed in our brain. I always tell people, you don't need to live in fear, because actually, if something really happens that is a true threat, your brain has the entire program and knows exactly how to activate your amygdala, to activate the stress response. Your body knows what to do. So I always like to say, you need discernment, you don't need fear. So if fear is in our imagination and our bodies don't know the difference, the brain doesn't know the difference between I'm imagining this or this is really happening, which goes the other way too, which is in the process of healing, If we have the power to create disease, we also have the power to heal. We can also flip that and say, I am well, I am healthy, and really start embodying those emotions. So I guess I just want to point that out, because the healing really happens in the level of the mind.
Yeah. A lot of it, absolutely. And again,
with behavior modifications, we're not going to discount all the lifestyle modifications that we need in order to live well as well.
Yes. Yeah. And also I want to say, I have my own story, my own journey that went, I went through. And by the way, what I should say is absolutely everything that I did, my body healed completely. And I was told by Western medicine that there's no cure. So my autoimmune issue basically was like a smorgasbord of like, name an autoimmune response, and I had a little bit of everything. So at that point they called it a non-specific connective tissue disorder. And as you know, where's your connective tissue? Everywhere in your body, right? So so what I want to say, I want to go back to this piece, like I know my own story, and I know other people's stories and their journeys, and I think me sitting here, what I do hope is that it gives someone some impulse to understand that your body can also change and get out of its own mess. And I also want to say that I know that there are people, and they've been on this quote unquote spiritual journey, and they end up having disease processes, and they end up leaving the planet out of their body with those disease processes. And who am I to also say that isn't what is perfect for them? Oops, I was touching I'm very handsy. Right? So I don't know, you can look at, I'm thinking of even of like Esther Hicks and her husband, like there at some point, sometimes an exit strategy is a disease process. So I just I want to be open to a bigger discussion that might be, this might be a first part of several conversations, right? So but always, I think, to start with, what is the body inviting us to look at?
Yeah, which is back to the questions, like, why is this happening for me instead of why it's happening to me?
Exactly.
It's like, what is the body trying to teach us? And again, it goes away from the guilt and the punishment, because no, it's never a punishment. It's never like we did something to cause ourselves to be sick, because these processes are always happening in our subconscious mind. Absolutely. And the invitation of any symptom or illness is to bring something from the subconscious to the conscious mind, and then we can use our free will and choose how we're going to navigate that.
Exactly.
So if we bring this back now more to practicality.
Yes, which I love.
Fear. A lot of people might be listening or watching this, so I just have the regular stress of life. I'm not living fear, and yet the fear is there. So what are some ways that fear shows up mostly for people, and people might still be denying that's fear? But let's talk about some of the expressions of fear, like how fear can show up kind of in a silenced way, but it's an expression of fear.
Okay, so this is so wild, and this is how I work too. So as you're saying that, what I'm being shown, right? So there's sometimes Deborah wants to answer. It's like, something else, wants to come through. A great way to look at that is to begin to notice, because sometimes, again, because it's so subtle or it's so quiet or someone's just not in tune with it, that they may not actually see it. But what they could look at, what I'm being pointed to, is, where am I compensating?
Yeah.
Where am I trying to quiet something or to numb something? Where am I trying to feel better? Like, I'm reaching for some food, or I'm over exercising, or I'm tuning out, in just watching something, or I'm drinking, or I'm smoking, or whatever the things that someone's using to help calm them, that I need a drink, or I need to go out, or something. Those are those moments to become, if you want, more aware, to go, wait a minute, am I actually hungry?
Yeah.
What am I actually hungry for?
Yeah.
Is there something there? Does that make sense?
100%. I think that's the greatest advice.
Because you wouldn't, like, maybe at that time, if I was listening to this podcast, I might go, before going to the therapist, I'd be like, I'm not angry. I don't have any trauma. I don't have any of these things. But maybe if I caught on to, what am I compensating? Oh, well, what was I doing? Am I overspending? Mm-hmm. Am I trying to be perfect? That's a compensation. If everything just is in order, then I'm going to be okay. I'll feel good. I can breathe. Well, that would be a compensating piece to look at. Or
constant seeking validation is a big one, right? I'm constant seeking validation. So in a way, what you're saying is we can use these compensations and turn around
exactly
and ask what is this behavior? This behavior is trying to solve a problem, right? Which is what any addiction is. And by the way, we're all addicts. I don't speak about just drugs,
no,
alcohol.
Absolutely.
Anytime we use behaviors to escape, and we use the behavior over and over, right, that is going to lead to negative outcomes, that's a form of addiction.
Yeah.
So any of these behaviors are always trying to solve a problem. So if we can ask, what's happening for me right now? What problem is trying to solve? Like you said, I need to calm my nervous system. And then we get curious enough to ask, what is causing my nervous system, right, or my body to be anxious, or my mind is racing? If we get curious, we get right there, to the root, which is fear of something.
Absolutely, because so if we followed something I'll just use me as an example, because still working with this. So I'm trying to compensate with something. I'm having a behavior that if I will slow it down, right? So this goes to moving towards more being than doing.
Yeah.
Even though it's going to feel like a doing. If I slow that down and I go, okay, wait, what am I feeling, right? Because the body's it's so wise, and it's going to, if you give it even a half a second, what's happening in my body? Oh, I'm feeling tense. Oh, I'm feeling hot. Oh, I feel like I'm about to cry. Like we're trying to cork something, when the best thing we could do is to uncork it, to literally let it out. I remember even when I was so unwell, I had this belief, this thought, and I thought it a lot. And once I started to move through into wellness, it of course came up. And my thought was, I said so often, I'm so sad internally. I'm so sad. It was a chronic thought. It was chronically something I said, not out loud, because that wouldn't be perfect to say to people, but inside, I'm so sad, I'm so sad. Now, everything's perfectly timed, right? Now I can go, okay, what was I so sad about? Now I can look at that. But at the time, if I would have stopped to go, what am I sad about? I could have given you a list easily. Okay, I'm sad about that. Well, can I do anything about those things? Right? So following that thread and being willing actually to be actually scared. And what I mean by that is, so many things that I needed to change felt scary to me. And yet my body was inviting me to do something different. And things blew up so that I would do that.
I think that's it. I think that's one of the reasons a lot of people don't listen to their bodies. They don't want to stop to listen to this voice, because a lot of times this voice of truth, it's saying make a change, and there's fear on that fear to make the change. So again, coming back to the practical,
what do we do?
Even before that, what is some of what you see with your clients? I also see with my clients, some of the most common themes of fear. For example, fear of being alone.
Fear of being alone, fear of being rejected, fear of being forgotten. The fear that, again, back to they're not enough, right? Which they're not necessarily articulating. We're just, I'm helping them. I'll lead them inside themselves to go, I don't feel good about myself, or I don't feel worthy. Sometimes there's a focus on outer world, which is part of our inner world too. It could be even in their, it's not really in the outer world, but I'm going to go back to the other. Domestic violence is part of it, different abuses. It was my fault. the fear of it was my fault, or it is my fault, or I'm doing something wrong. And then I'll go outside of like the internal thing. I've worked with a lot of clients that are carrying the burden of the entire world, and the fear of that.
Yeah.
Right. I've even had people, and you and I have talked about this before, where they're like, I'm so afraid I'm going to be alone. I'm not going to have someone to love me, or I'm going to lose, everything I have, and I'm not going to have enough to eat, or I'm not, whatever that is. And, for an area that we live in, people we work with, it's, there's definitely a certain level of affluence, right? And I'll often say, has that happened to you? I mean, I have had clients that have not had enough to eat. That's true. But the majority, often if I really go, has this ever happened to you? Yeah. So this goes back to your thoughts, right? The idea of the thought. And they're like, no. So often the very thing they're afraid of has never happened, but they're looking outside to war-torn,
Well, there's a sense of scarcity, which is so imprinted in our collective, and something we inherit from our past generations.
Sure.
This sense of scarcity, right?
Sure.
And I'm going to add another fear that a lot of people have, which is fear of what other people are going to think of me.
Yeah.
Which goes back to the fear of rejection, fear not being enough.
Yeah.
So I know people, they're like, they organize their entire lives, everything they do around the fear of what others will think of them.
Absolutely.
Which leads to a lot of stress.
Well, which is so wild, because the essence of that, like, let's say I'm so afraid of people rejecting me. Let's say that's my deal, which definitely was a deal. What's actually the energy that's being embodied right there is I'm not being my authentic self. So I'm actually rejecting myself.
That's right.
Period.
Yeah.
And as we know, as I'm rejecting self, then that's going to show up in my field. If I'm betraying self, that's going to show up in my field.
So let's go there.
Go.
Let's go.
I'm like, go.
To it. We know our external world is a projection of our internal world. So the more we fear, the more we organize our entire lives around our fear, actually the more the fear is going to be expressed and bring us the things that we fear the most, right? For example, I was long time ago in a relationship where I was in love with this person. I had constant fear that this person was going to leave me. Well, that's exactly what happened, right? Because I was not authentic in a relationship, because that's the root of codependency, actually.
Right.
That you mold yourself, everything you do, everything you say is around, I'm going to behave this way so that person doesn't leave me. That's an example. I want to address this because then we can start also addressing how we can use fear to actually become free.
Absolutely.
So first, let's talk about how the external world is mirroring us.
Well, so you just gave such a great example, right? So, but that didn't just start, your fear of being quote unquote left, as we know. I mean, I know so many
starts
of
in
your
childhood, yeah.
So it starts in childhood. So this idea of the fear running rampant on some level from when we're little, and a lot of people actually, that I have found, they don't want to go back into their childhood because they say, well, I love my parents, and I had good parents, and they don't want to. There's some level of dishonoring. I either see a complete blame, right? My parents, and they're going to be stuck there for a while and not thriving, right? Or they're like, oh, I don't want to go there because my parents, they have, I think, the ability to see my parents were good parents and they did the best they could. Yes.
Yeah.
And it, whatever's living inside you can come out. You could still love your parents, you could still honor your parents, and actually you could probably, if they're still on the planet, still have a great relationship with them. So I think that's really important to go back to the idea of fear, that if I've been in chronic fear from a littlehood, I'm going to call it, which I was, not realizing it, right? My parents fought a lot, and I was always trying to be this peacemaker. I was the little kid who was slipping notes under the door and saying, please stop fighting, because as a sensitive person, which I actually think we all are, maybe some more than others, I don't know, it rocked my world. So, it was in a way tearing me apart, and I wanted that to stop. But that didn't stop. That didn't get solved,
Yeah.
you know? And so this idea of chronic fight or flight, the whole system being off, you know, the illness doesn't just happen when you get the diagnosis.
Yeah. Such an important point.
Right?
You don't get sick overnight. It's a process.
It's pretty rare.
It's a process.
It's pretty rare. And something that would be an acute illness, you know, even if you're like, oh, you know, I look at everything as an invitation to check out what was happening at that time, even if it's quote unquote food poisoning. It's just like, how did my body succumb to that this week? Yeah. I literally, I have a friend of mine who said, can't a cold just be a cold with you, Deborah? I'm like, no, it can't. It can't.
We are those annoying people.
It can't, but you know, I don't put that on everyone, but for me, no, because generally speaking, sometime in that week or something, I've been off course.
Yeah. Something weak in your immune system.
Something,
exactly.
I had some level of stress, absolutely.
Because Dolores Cannon, blessings to her on the other side.
Yeah.
She says something that I know is going to sound challenging to a lot of people, but I'm going to say anyway. We are not designed to be sick. So of course, I don't want the audience to take this as like, well, but that's not realistic. In a spiritual level, let's say we didn't live in separation. If we're always connected, which we don't, that's why we chose to incarnate in this 3D planet here, we are not designed to be sick. And we have, one thing that I struggle with now is that we have created a system where we normalized disease. I actually was talking to a friend yesterday whose husband is being struggling with leukemia, and his numbers just got a little worse, so there's a concern that he's not getting better because of his stress level, he's in survival. And she actually heard from the doctor that now a certain amount of cancer is normal in our society. Cancer is normal, we should expect. And that to me is just like, no, we cannot normalize, but we have normalized. We have normalized taking drugs to just treat symptoms. So back to, if our body is not designed to be sick, I'm with you. I'm always going to look at any condition as an invitation and not try to rationalize or guilt myself or others for that. But again, it's an invitation to slow down and to be still. And I think one of the problems that, number one, it is very simple, but it's causing a lot of people to be sick, is the neglect of resting.
Oh, such a good one. It's such a good one. You know, and even back to your cancer piece, what came to me is this idea of, you know, cancer has great marketing. Okay, I just said that. That's a mic drop. It has great marketing.
Yeah.
It is constantly, the idea of cancer is in our face. Constantly.
The focus is on.
The focus is there, and depending on how much you watch TV or, you know, surf the web or, you know, on Insta or whatever, and it's not to say to ignore that, but there's some sticky reasons for that, because it is big business.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that could be another podcast, but cancer has great marketing. And I think why that's coming through is just to notice even that idea of fear, like, well, I'm getting to that certain age, right? Or like there's that.
It's normalizing illness with getting older.
1,000%.
And we need to be very cautious with that, because
1,000%.
we can get old and never get sick.
It's true. It's very true. Like, you know, an example in my quote unquote lineage where I could get really caught is, you know, there is some dementia. You know, I have a grandmother currently right now that's 102. Her quality of life, I don't think, is fantastic, but she's still here. So, you know, she's got stuff still to do. And I look at that and I look at the potential for that's been there, and that's something I prefer not to have. Now, I don't go, I'll never have that, it's not for me, but I'm making choices in my life to do some things differently than generations before me. And I'm going to circle back. And a big thing that I absolutely believe is the internal work on what is living in the body temple that's been unresolved, that we went and we stopped, I believe is a huge part of that. It's a huge part of it. Because think about it, even with dementia, and I know there's these type 3 diabetes and there's all these scientific things, but again, a piece of that, my personal belief is that if there are things that I am actually forgetting, I don't want to look at, right? It's so perfectly aligned with the dementia process.
That's a good point.
And in fact, I just talked to someone recently who I've known a very long time, and he is experiencing some cognitive issues, and he said, well, maybe I just don't want to remember things I don't want.
So it's almost like a piece can be like, almost like, again, right, where we focus on, we end up manifesting. It's like, I don't want to think about this. I don't want to remember this. I don't want to remember my childhood, or I don't want to remember this trauma in my life. Then actually your brain
is obedient.
It's obedient
in some way.
It's a very interesting point.
Well, and also, I don't know whose quote this is, but the idea that if you want to call it God or universe or consciousness, quantum field, is always saying yes. That's why I say there's no punishment, right? So whatever our focus is, chronic focus.
It's always a yes.
It's always a yes. Yeah. I've seen that in my life over and over again.
I love that.
For sure.
Well, why not? Let's go there. Okay. Universal, law, God, quantum. Let's go to the level of energy. So we know everything is energy. So illness is going to be developed in the body in a certain frequency, and the frequency based on the frequency of the thoughts. If we're constantly in fear, it's fair to say that we're going to be having a lot of thoughts based on a lot of beliefs that are not in the highest vibration, because they're not in the vibration, let's say, of love, of universal love, or gratitude. So
peace,
exactly. So we start living in a vibration of fear.
Yes, and that vibration of fear produces chemicals in the body. You can literally feel it.
Measure, and it's measurable.
It is absolutely measurable. What happens in your brain is now measurable. But you're causing, I'm going to swear, you're causing a chemical shitstorm every time you have thoughts that are actually, they're weakening your immune system. They're predisposing you. Because there is, we've talked about this before, Alex, because you're so great with your nutrition and your body workouts and all of that. And we've had some fun arm wrestlings about, well, why is it that there are people who, I'm thinking of someone right now, there are people who seem to do all the not right things, judgment, right? They're not eating healthy. They're not eating organic. They're maybe drinking. They're smoking. They're doing all the things, and yet they never get sick.
Yeah,
never, right? Because in their mind, this is how strong our mind is, right? That's not a problem for them.
Exactly. There's no separation. There's not a fight inside them, which is a bit different for me. If I'm eating healthy, I'm gonna create a fight inside me. I'm gonna like, I shouldn't be eating these fries. I shouldn't be eating this pizza. I shouldn't be drinking that extra glass of wine. So that separation, that guilt that I'm creating in myself, that itself is a conflict, versus a lot of people are eating the fries, the hot dogs, and the pizza. I'm not encouraging anybody to do that diet. And yet they live in such a state of joy, peace, gratitude. They're always in community. They always collaborating. They connected. They might not even ever use the word spirit or God, but they're connected with love. And most likely those people don't get sick.
No, it's wild. They don't. That's like, no, and actually that belief for some people is like, this is what works for me. And it works on a certain level for them. I had this client who actually had I don't know if she still does, an organic vineyard. And everything was organic, and I'm going to use the word perfect. And we're working with that. She had a couple kids, and I remember getting that lesson of feeling. I could feel the frequency of, yeah, that's great that everything's organic, super, but the energy behind it had an edge to it, and it wasn't neutral. It wasn't completely joyful and beautiful. And I remember Spirit's words coming through, and she got it. This is what I love. I love when someone else can feel it too. And basically what was said to her was, could you just give your kids a couple of lollipops? And she looked at me and she goes,
because the rigidity itself, will create a negative charge.
The disharmony.
Yeah, the disharmony
in the body temple. So, that was that perfectionism. I got to do this right. And often, when we swing really hard in a certain direction with an edge, so it's not neutral, right? Then, like, her children had to have been feeling that. Right? And so generally, what's that going to cause? Generationally, those kids often will completely rebel over here and go in a different direction rather than having some sort of swing that's just gentle like this. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not to one hard edge or to another, but just, okay, this is just life. We can embrace all these things in a huge way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what can we share with the audience? Especially for those I am in state of stress, because I see the highest expression of society of fear is anxiety. Again, we have normalized anxiety, and depression is just the other side, the exact same coin. It's also a state of fear. It's just depression is expressed more in a state of a lot of fatigue and low energy, versus anxiety is the high energy. And anxiety is an expression of fear. Worry is an expression of fear. So let's say the listeners are listening to us and they want to start shifting their frequency. They don't want to be in the frequency of fear anymore. So what would be maybe the first steps, because we know this is a lot of work, and if they're interested, they can work with you, they can work with me, they can work with somebody that resonates for them, but it's starting to explore. But right now, if somebody wants to start making some shifts, how they can start working with the fear?
The first thing I see in my mind's eye is the self-talk. Begin to become more aware than you ever have before.
What are you telling yourself?
With the self-talk. What are you saying to yourself? And maybe that's it. Maybe just for a whole week, you get some paper out. It doesn't even have to be a beautiful journal. Just get some scrap paper out and just notice, what am I saying? And let it be. Don't beat yourself up. Don't say anything on top of that if you can. Just be I'm going to get curious. I love the idea of getting curious. So just get curious. And do I have self-talk? What does that look like? Because it is so insidious, and it's generally been going on, and it's been this background record player for so long. Often it's someone else's voice that you took on and ingested, if you will, that is coming through. And so then you can start playing with that. And sometimes it can be tricky to do that on your own. Some people are really good at that, and they can follow through. And I call it following the thread. Well, what is this? Oh, I'm stupid. That's a great one. I remember one time sitting at the table, and I was doing something, and I heard, you're so stupid. And I was thankfully I was awake enough, and the voice didn't even sound like my own inner voice. And I was wait a minute. And I was able to do exactly what I'm talking about. And I just went, wait a minute. That's not my voice. That's not me. And it made me, now this took a while, people, it took decades of work, but it made me laugh. I go, I reject that. And of course there's times I don't, but I think finding and being aware and curious and gentle with yourself, it's such a good time to be so gentle with yourself, despite whatever you've been through, and start looking at the self-talk. That will give you clues as to what's been living in there. And then it could be, well, why is that there? Why am I saying I'm stupid, or I'm an idiot, or I'm ugly, or whatever? Where did that come from? And often people go, ooh, well, my mother, I'm working with someone where her mother has been perfectionistic and focused on beauty. She came from an era where, you're pretty and you put on the makeup and you do all the things so you can have a man, and she's passed that on, right? That's part of this person's inheritance, and they've been rebelling against that and working with that, but their mother's voice is in their head.
Yeah.
So we're working on creating more of her own authentic voice and what's true for her, so she's not rebelling, but she's being authentically what she wants to do, to express. So I think first and foremost, going back to get curious, find the self-talk. It is one of the biggest clues to what is working in our system. And then if you are unable to kind of go to that core, or you're afraid to go to that core, go get a therapist, go do a workshop, find a coach, find someone to support you. Absolutely. I mean, I am not here in what I've been able to do, and I know you are not here in what you've been able to do and what we're going to continue to do because we did it alone.
No, not at all.
We've had a team, we've had coaches, we've had therapists, we've had friends, we've had, it's really a village of awakening.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, I heard this the other day, and I think it's great. Don't suffer alone. We're not designed to suffer alone. No. We're not designed to go through this alone. Has never been the design to do any of this work alone. And this is behind a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. Like, I know 50% of Americans are suffering of loneliness, which is insanity.
Yeah.
But
they feel it, and it's real.
But they feel it, and it's real. I have experienced a lot of loneliness myself.
Yeah.
And again, the root is this insane belief that we are separate, but ultimately we have to dissolve this separation inside ourselves.
Yeah. Well, that's the journey, right?
That's the journey. And I love what the strategy you share about starting to work with fear, because the way out of fear is through the fear, which is witnessing our thoughts. Like, if you just grab a piece of paper and you start writing the inner dialogue, you start creating some distance and seeing that these words are not yours. So you start disidentifying and understand the true concept that we are not our thoughts, we're not our emotions. Right. And you start the work there, and then, if you need help, work with somebody.
Well, I'll add a second thread, just because some people don't have the financial means to work with people. And what I see, like a column. So say I've written a column of the funky things that I'm saying. And what I often do with the client is I'll go, okay, so what is the opposite of that? So if and I know we're saying something that seems so simple, but it's something people say a lot to themselves, is I'm so stupid. Right? You may not be saying that to you, but a lot of people do. And so what's the opposite? Is that true? I'd be going, okay, is that actually true? Well, maybe there's sometimes I feel that way, but am I actually stupid? What does stupid mean? Maybe look it up in the different, is that really true for me? And what is the opposite of stupid? Like, what would you say? So what's the opposite
I'm brilliant.
I'm brilliant. Okay.
I'm intelligent.
Yeah. So find something that is true, even if you think it's 10% true. Okay, so I'm brilliant. I love that which I love, because isn't the soul quite brilliant? Quite light filled. Yeah. So I love that you said that as a first. I'm brilliant. So then I would say, okay, let's flip that. Let's produce the I'm brilliant, and we'll put this at the top of the chart over here. And then what I have them do, because you can't have it until you have it. And what I mean by that is you must feel the brilliance. Yeah. It can't just be, I'm touching the dog's coming in now. It can't just be, I'm thinking I'm brilliant. You actually must feel it.
Yeah, it can't just be a bunch of post notes around your house.
No,
where you say you're brilliant. Exactly.
Although I love post-it notes,
I do too.
But it could be like, okay, wait, I'm going to take a minute just to feel it. Okay, what would it be like? Maybe I haven't felt brilliant ever. Maybe I haven't felt that. But what would it like?
What would it be like?
And so then you try that on. That to me is the extension of saying an affirmation. You're being that affirmation, right? It goes back to what I was saying about the I want to be a blessing versus I am. Yeah. So I am brilliant. What does that feel like?
Because it goes back to being in the frequency,
completely
energy. Because ultimately, I think it's this. We're gonna wrap it up here. Energy ultimately is what either creates a disease and ultimately heals a disease. We have to work on the level of energy, right? So what you're saying is, yes, think, even read, I'm brilliant or I'm intelligent, but feeling is ultimate what is going to get into that language of energy.
Absolutely. And we don't know, each person's disease process is their own unique journey.
Yeah.
And I think if we can get to that place that, quote unquote, no matter how it turns out, to just look and see that there are people who probably have had the disease process you have, who have successively moved through it, and who have used it and become so at peace with life, or changed something about their life that they're so much happier, so much more fulfilled than they ever would have been without that disease process.
Yeah. I would encourage, that's a great point. I would encourage people, if you're experiencing anything, you had a diagnosis or you're dealing with diagnosis right now, get curious and go read the stories. There's like hundreds of books now of how people have healed or made peace with their condition and live a long life is still with the diagnosis. Yeah. They might not be what we call quote unquote healed or cured, but they're living a very beautiful, high quality life because they decided to embrace life fully. And then all of a sudden, instead of having 1 year to live, as their doctor said, they're having 20, 30 years.
Exactly.
Because, so go read the stories, go get inspired. And I'm going to repeat something that Gabor Mate says, like when you get a diagnosis, it's just a description of something.
Go on. I love it.
And it's a description of something. You are not destined to become that. So don't do your best, do this work, don't become the disease. I love what you said, like I'm not a cancer survivor. Don't become the disease. Like people say, I have anxiety, I have depression, or I have autoimmune disease, versus I like to say, I'm experiencing some cold symptoms. I'm experiencing something, but don't become the thing, because if you, it's going to be much harder to heal if you become identified with that description.
For sure. Absolutely. And one of the things you just said that I wanted, this was a download I got when I was writing my book, and it says, although a diagnosis may be incurable, symptoms and disease are not.
Perfect. And please say the name of your book.
It's Okay to Be Spiritual and Wealthy. Beyond, obviously.
I will put the link
beyond
on the show notes.
Beyond any kind of wealth, because I think this is an ultimate topic that if you do not have the health that you once had, then it kind of doesn't matter what else is going in your life. If it's really, so deteriorating for you, to me, being healthy as we can in mind, body, and spirit, whatever that means, that's true wealth.
Yeah, well said. Before we share information on how people can find you, is anything else in your heart that you want to share about healing or fear, living a life where we're free? How can we be free?
Well, I call them little ditties. Often either angelic beings or master teachers will come through intuitively for me. And one of the things that was said to me in the very beginning of my professional work is the safest place for you to be is in your vulnerability. And I want to just elaborate a wee bit, because vulnerability is something that people are afraid to be. And yet, if I am my most authentic self and I'm being vulnerable with the people around me, then it's going to weed out, right? I don't have to pretend that I'm something that I'm not to try and get people to stay or be around or whatever I'm trying to do. But when I'm just my vulnerable self, this is who I am. I'm hurting, I'm sad, I'm happy, I need something, I have a boundary. If I just live that authentic place, then my life actually gets sorted for me. I either attract the people I need or I repel. Does this make sense? Yeah. So, safest place. Speaking, because we talked about fear. Well, if you're in your vulnerability, if you're in your actual heart-centered truth, then that's going to be a key.
I love that.
Yeah.
So
me too.
be in your vulnerability, and not just to clarify, not to say that you intentionally gonna be pushing anything away or attracting, but
No.
you stand more in a place of authenticity. So the universe, God, or nature is gonna take care of
Just allow.
of like removing the energies that are not in alignment with you,
Yeah.
and attracting energies another way. Attract more love, more peace, more playfulness, more. Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Thank
Deborah.
you. Oh my
And-
gosh.
And how can people find you?
They can go to my website, which is DeborahAtianneWilson.com, and they can connect with me there.
Awesome. I will put all your information under the show notes. And
I want to say thank you to you.
thank you so much. And for the listeners, if you have any question, anything we said it wasn't clear to you, or any feedback, please don't hesitate to send us an email. Emails are going to be under the show notes too. And yeah, I want to say thank you, my sister.
Thank you.
Blessings.
Love you.
Blessings
Love
to
you so
all.
much.
Thank you.